My name is Louisa Jane Smith, and this is the RE podcast, the podcast for those of you who think RE is boring, which it is, and I'll prove it to you. Now, I think most of us are familiar with the basics of Sikhi, but I wonder if there is a depth that we often miss out. In order to help our teaching of Sikhi be more authentic, I've invited Mandip Singh from Khalsa Jatha British Isles in Holland Park in London, that I had the greatest of pleasure of visiting again recently. It's the oldest Gurdwara in Britain, established in 1908, and Princess Mandip Singh prayed here, and more about her later. So welcome, Mandip.
Thank you very much for having me, Louisa.
Do you want to just let the listeners know who you are and what you do?
Yes, so I'm actually a volunteer at the Gurdwara, which is also unusually a piece of British history. It's older than the BBC, I'd have you say. So my name is Mandip Singh. I'm a trustee and volunteer at the Khalsa Jatha British Isles in Holland Park, which is the oldest Gurdwara in Europe, established in 1908. And for about 40 odd years, this was the only Gurdwara in the UK, and it has a very significant place in British history. Lots of significance to pass through its doors. I'm also a co-founder of an organisation called Gurdwara Aid, which is a national Tier 2 charity that provides infrastructure and support to Gurdwaras and Sikh organisations across the country.
So not too busy then.
Just a little bit.
And I sort of want to start where Aki started. And I think that a lot of us teach that sort of Sikhi started in India in a context of where Hindu Dharma and Islam were already prevalent. But what are the relationships between Sikhi and those faiths, and what may be some of the misconceptions that we sometimes teach about these?
I mean, you're right to start there, I think, and it's quite important to touch this. I think the misconception is that Sikhi is an amalgamation of these two faiths, fusion of Hinduism and Islam, and I can say it's not. And I will use scripture as the example. So, for example, the Guru Granth Sahib has taken some 1,000 years to write. It covers a span of that long. And you may ask how, as a Sikh faith is only 550 years old. It's because the earliest contributors to the Guru Granth Sahib lived several hundred years before Guru Nanak, who were Muslims, Hindus, and others from all walks of life, kings, scholars, Brahmins, traders, butchers, weavers, and the whole breadth of faith traditions and of society are contributors to the Guru Granth Sahib. What this means is that this way of thinking about the divine was always there and practiced over time and by people of all walks of life. So what this means is that it tells us as well, actually, the aim of merging or meeting the divine is common to all faiths and those of no faith as well, actually. And Guru Nanak Dev Ji came to re-establish this thinking and approach, one which has always existed. So the Guru Granth Sahib talks about 4 ages, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a little later on. And this approach, this methodology had existed in all those ages as it does now. So Sikhi didn't borrow from other faiths. It gathered 1,000 years. It gathered 1,000 years in this age and tens of thousands of years in all the other ages, and gathering voices of all who describing the same journey.
So can I clarify that, are we still okay to teach that Sikhi started 500 years ago with Guru Nanak, but the scriptures draw on wisdom from before that?
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Guru Nanak started the movement, the key as we know it now, but the wisdom is derived from many hundreds and thousands of years beforehand. Absolutely
Okay.
correct way to think about it. Yes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so actually what might be nice to think about is the Sikh understanding of truth, because if we think of truth as a linear thing, then actually maybe that isn't necessarily representing kind of a Sikh idea of truth. So what is the Sikh understanding of truth?
I guess it comes in the very first line, the Mool Mantra, which I guess most teachers would know about, which is essentially a statement of the divine. That the divine is a truth, some of the qualities. It's always been truthful, and is truth now, and will be forever truth. I guess that's just a statement, but really the key thing that the Guru Granth Sahib then asks is the next line, which is the question that drives everything and what we're trying to do in the Sikh faith. And the question is, if this is the truth, how do I become the truth in the same way? So truth in Sikh is not a proposition you're sent to, it's something you become. And it's something that we talk about that's always there. So the divine has always been there, and it's us who come and go in this world, just in the same way as the leaves fall off trees every season and leaves come in, just as the sun rises every day and sets every night. So the formulation for Guru Nanak is that truth is high, but highest still is truth in living. And I think we might be touching on that later on as well. And the rest of the Guru Granth Sahib is really trying to answer that question. And it's delivered through a series of Q&As, stories, myths, and in many languages, in the voices of the rich, the poor, across different castes and different faiths. So it is trying to deliver that message to all of that sort of richness of tradition of people. So the working frame of Sikh ethics, I guess, is a line that comes in Guru Granth Sahib, Ke Mere Ke Tu, loosely translated. Loosely means that every moment and every action, thought, and emotion either takes you towards the divine or away from the divine. When it goes away from the divine, we go towards what we know as the self or the home or the sense of I. And this is a lot simpler than good and bad, but actually it's a lot more demanding as well in its application.
Actually, one thing that almost connects those two questions is that what's an sort of interesting perspective from the Sikh perspective is that if there are commonalities or similarities between different faiths and Sikhi, it's because the truth is there and they've discovered part of that truth. It's not that you've taken it from those worldviews or from those religions, is that you've both stumbled on the truth, because the truth is kind of bigger than any of those individual religions.
You've hit the nail on the head, and that's really the view we would take from a Sikh perspective. The truth has always been there, and it's up to us to walk that path. And really, that's demonstrated through the 30 different authors of the Guru Granth Sahib over 1,000 years, because they all are walking the same path, regardless of which faith or tradition they might be in. They've all recognised the same truth, and that's the uniqueness, or I guess the message that the Guru Nanak is trying to bring out.
It's fascinating. The other thing that I found really interesting when we were talking was the significance of warrior within Sikhi. If we understand that in the context of when Sikhi started and the sort of Indian caste system, that actually there's a significance of why you use that kind of terminology in Sikhi. So just unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, I guess the context is at that time, the Mughals had invaded India. The Mughals are essentially Mongols, descendants of Genghis Khan, and they brought in their kind of brutal ways. And at that time, the only people who could stand up were the warrior caste, or the Kshatriya in a traditional caste system. And they fought within a set of rules which they developed themselves, whereas the Mughals did not recognize those rules. And so it was kind of a no-win situation for the Kshatriyas at that time in India, which allowed the Mughals to ransack through India and then impose their rule and their kind of way of life, brutal way of life actually, for those who are not Mughals. So the Guru that started the 6th Guru and then the 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh, essentially said, actually, if you are not going to pick up the mantle to fight for the truth, then we will do it. And that's essentially where it started from. And therefore, they created a single caste called the Kshatriya, the warrior. The context of that was when the Mughals came into India, the Kshatriya were the only class who could fight back. They were the only ones who could pick up weapons and go to war. They had their own rules, which had developed over thousands of years, which the Mughals did not respect. What that meant was that the Kshatriya were destroyed, decimated, and it was very easy for the Mughals to establish rule and their way of life. And for a non-Mughal, it's actually a very brutal way of life. On the back of that, the Guru said, all the people of truth, all the religious people, have gone to hide, and therefore who's going to stand up for the truth and protect the ordinary people? If they're not going to do it, I will do it. Essentially, that's what they did, and they created the Khalsa, which is really a Kshatriya, a warrior of the Kshatriya, a warrior king. So in the Sikh faith, there is only one caste, that of the warrior king. And what the Guru Gobind Singh did, he made it available to all, and because the first initiates all came from the low castes. And he had a phrase, sparrows will hunt eagles, and that's what he was looking to make happen. And that's quite there, because he created this new order with first 5 Panch Pyare, and then in turn he asked them to initiate him into this new order that he had created. So what's the link with weapons? I guess it's a deeper link with weapons, and also knowledge, I guess, is another area that's often overlooked. Now, the Guru Granth Sahib links weapons to spiritual knowledge. The word it uses is Gyan Karak. This is a double-edged sword of knowledge of the divine, or Brahm Gyan. In the current age, which is the age of darkness and mistruths, only knowledge of the truth can protect us. It provides us a spiritual sword to cut through the darkness. It is this knowledge that has been written down by the followers and devotees, the seekers of truth, for us to use, which is what the Guru Granth Sahib is. It's an expression of over 30 devotees from different walks of life, covering a time span of 1,000 years, doing this very thing that wisdom is providing us. So really the warrior symbols are not a decoration and they're certainly not for aggression. These shastras, as they're known weapons, are revered symbols, justice and a duty to protect the weak. The concept of Miripiri and the union of spiritual and temporal priority is just that. And we'll often talk about this Samsabai principle, which is a saint soldier or the warrior soldier or saint warrior. And the tradition starts with being a saint first before you go towards the warrior area. And if you think about it, a Sikh, an initiated Sikh, is a walking example of that, because when you look at a Sikh, he has a turban on his head, which represents a Singh or sovereignty, and the long beard, which represents the saintliness aspect. So straight away you can see that the two things are combined together.
Okay. And actually, this was a question I was going to ask later, but I think it kind of makes sense to mention here, because you've mentioned their initiated Sikhs, which are the ones that maybe are the most recognizable because of the kind of symbols and the way they present. But actually, one thing I didn't realize is actually kind of almost 3 different types of Sikhs. Could you just go through those for us?
Yeah, I mean, Sikhs themselves see ourselves in 3 different broad groups, I guess. One is what we call Amatari Sikhs. Sikhs have been initiated into Khalsa, and they keep the 5Ks, and they have to go through an initiation ceremony known as Amat Sinchar to get to that point. Taking the initiation is actually a choice; it's not a mandatory thing. So that's what we would call Amatari Sikh. So I myself will be known as an Amatari Sikh because I've been through that initiation ceremony. The next kind of category, I guess, is what we call Gesadari. So these might be Sikhs who have some uncut hair, or they do trim some of their hair, or cut their beard, or trim their beard, might keep a turban, or they might even have, full long hair, but they're not initiated, so then they cannot carry the 5Ks. And the third category probably is a Sikh who does cut his hair, but identifies himself as a Sikh and follows the principles of the Gurus, comes to the Gurdwara as a practice. So that's kind of the broad 3 categories that you will come across, and that's how Sikhs themselves see ourselves in those kind of 3 categories.
Yeah. Okay. And actually, what's really interesting as I'm listening to you speak is there's certain language that you're using, and I think sometimes as RE teachers, we maybe simplify things, or we don't use authentic language because we don't want to maybe confuse children. But actually what that does is that the students in our class don't necessarily understand the distinctness of each religious faith. So just talk about sort of words that as teachers would be good if we used, for example, using the word divine rather than God.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back, Gurus met people in their own language. So wherever they went, try to use the language of that area to explain the message. Language is really important because there are about something like 18 or so different languages in the Guru Granth Sahib, from Farsi, which is a Persian language, to Sanskrit, to Hindi, Punjabi, South Indian languages. So language is really important. So there are some words, like if you've picked on one word, the word divine is a better representation of how the Sikh thinks about God, I guess. God carries a monotheistic frame, and that is really not that close to a Sikh sort of representation of about what the divine is or God is. So using the word God is a little bit misleading and creates a different kind of impression in a child. The word Waheguru, for example, again, we tend to use, sometimes people use the word wonderful Lord, or sometimes even God. That's really what I would say a lazy translation. The Guru is an enlightener. So if you take the words Guru, it's Gu and Ru, which is from going from darkness to light, and the Wahi is just wonder. So it's just like saying, wow, So it's so the word enlightenment is much closer to the way we would think about things. So that someone who's enlightened shines a light on a path towards you. The word,
and actually, we quite often call it teacher, which
yes,
is not. Essentially that is what a teacher does, is that we kind of create sort of enlightenment, or we bring people from the darkness of ignorance into the light of knowledge.
yes.
But I think Guru, probably I don't know whether that's just it's similar to but not the same, and so actually trying to use the word enlightener for guru, divine rather than God. Yeah. What was the other
Yeah,
one?
it is
Yeah.
similar. It's just for someone who enlightens you, it's enlightenment in a spiritual sense rather than in a
Yeah.
material or physical,
Yeah. Or mental sense. Yeah.
mental sense.
Absolutely.
So that's a nuance in yours, I guess. I suppose the other one is, Sikhs themselves would use the word Sikhi rather than Sikhism.
Yeah.
And that's, it's quite important for people to understand that that's how Sikhs see themselves as well. And that's more
Yeah.
authentic than using the word Sikhism.
Yeah. And partly just because ism is quite a colonized
Absolutely.
way of understanding it, and it doesn't understand the nuance of the etymology of Sikhi coming from Sikna, which is to learn, which links to that
Absolutely.
idea of enlightenment.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's a really good example of why Sikhs would prefer to use the word Sikhi.
Yeah. Yeah. The other word was Dharamsala, which is probably the more authentic word for Gurdwara. So Gurdwara is quite a new word. Am I right?
That's absolutely true. Gurdwara is a more recent word. All of these places before were known as Dharamsalas. So the Gurdwara I'm at, we were known as a Dharamsala in the early years. And about 50 or 60 years ago, everyone started using the word Gurdwara. So Dharamsala is probably a more accurate word. But actually, the word Gurdwara, it still works because it's a door of the Guru. And what you get at the door of the Guru is spiritual wisdom. So it still kind of works. The word Dharamsala is technically it's center of spiritual learning, which is what you're doing when you go to a Gurdwara. So it does work, but the more authentic word is a Dharamsala, which even Sikhs probably don't use that word so much now.
Yeah. And actually, something you've said a couple of times, which is that the Guru Granth Sahib Ji it's written in Gurmukhi, which is the script, but actually the Guru Granth Sahib Ji is in, I'm just going to wait for the
Just wait for
ice cream ban.
I don't believe an ice cream van's out at this time of night. Oh my goodness. Oh, I could see that.
Hilarious.
Yeah. Goodness gracious me.
It's not a problem at all. This is the beauty of podcasting, is that you get all the idiosyncratic sounds, and it makes it feel like somebody's there with you in your house. So it's good. So yeah, so the Guru Granth Sahib Ji's, the script is Gurmukhi, but actually the language, there's how many languages did you say?
There's about 18 different languages.
18.
And the word Gurmukhi just means from the Guru's mouth. So whatever they spoke is written down in that script. It's if they spoke in Farsi or if they spoke in Pashto, if they spoke in Punjabi, it's still considered to be Gurmukhi because it's been uttered by their words. So that's the essential sort of distinction, I guess. So
Yeah.
what that.
Okay. And actually, we've talked about the divine a little bit, but actually, it'd be really interesting to understand sort of how Sikhs understand the divine, I guess. And so, if we maybe look at the concept of Sargun and Nirgun and how that helps Sikhs to understand the divine.
Yeah, so there's a line from the Guru Granth Sahib, Sargun Nirgun Nirikar. And so what is that? If I'll try to break it down a little bit. So Sargun is essentially something that has qualities and virtues, and it's commonly taken as something which has form. So the divine is, in the way we look at it, divine is inside creation. Well, the creation is inside the divine, in the world, in every form, and visible through everything. When you look at Nirgun, it means something that's without qualities or virtues. So commonly we take that as something being without form, or beyond name, or unmanifest. So those are kind of differences. And when you put the two, I mean, it's a juxtaposition, I guess, in one way. But when you put the two together, it's more aligned to what I would say the Sikh faith is more like a pantheistic kind of thinking, and it's specifically to the idea of what I call oneness. So it's not strictly Hindu or Abrahamic, and it's the concept when you get the concept that everything is one, and that we are within the divine, and everything exists within the divine. Then when you come to the Gurdwara, it kind of makes a little bit more sense in the way you kind of practice and talk about it.
So you've mentioned the Moor Mantra, and I think that this is something that we commonly teach. We teach it at Key Stage 3. It's part of the GCSE if you choose Sikhi as your religion, and it's part of the A-level if you choose Sikhi. What exactly is the Moor Mantra, and what are maybe some of the things contained in it that we maybe misrepresent?
I think the Moor Mantra, I mean, there's lots of interpretations, and it kind of depends how much depth you want to go into. And the very first two words kind of define an awful lot. The first two lines is Ik Oankar, which is, the first letter is one, there's only one. And Oankar talks about a sound that started everything with the whole of creation, which we are in. And the rest of the month we talk about various qualities, about truth, about without fear, without humility, and things like that. And then it will go on to say, through the Guru's grace, this can be achieved. And then it makes another statement around the divine being infinite. Is the divine was always there at the start, is there, is here, it's here now, and it's always going to be in the future. So the Mill Mantra is essentially just a statement, and everything you need to know about God or the divine. The more important question comes in the next slide after that, which is often something that gets missed. And the question is, if this is truth, how did I become truthful about that? And the rest of the Guru Granth Sahib, the 1430 pages, is spent answering that question. And at the end of the day, the Guru Granth Sahib is trying to bring a transformation in us and a complete change in mindset and the creation of what I call new virtuous habits, so that I or you or anyone can get to a place where we can see and experience the divine in ourselves as well as in others, and also, more importantly, behave in the way that we do. It tells you what the divine is, and the rest of the Good Granth Sahib tells you how to become it. And that's kind of essentially how we see the split within the Good Granth Sahib.
And is that linked to what you were saying earlier about there's kind of almost two states, and there's going towards the divine and coming away? Is there a link then between you're moving towards truth or moving away from truth?
Absolutely. I suppose the Saigun and Nirgun aspects are what you could say, what goes on inside, how do you change inside?
Yeah.
And the changes that you make out inside would come out in your actions externally. So it's kind of, that's the way we connect towards it. So, as I said earlier, that every action, thought, emotion would take you towards the divine or away from the divine. And the way it comes out is it goes inside first, it gets up, you process it and do whatever everybody does. And then without thinking about it, it becomes an unconscious action or subconscious action that you do automatically. And that's the whole kind of way we look at it.
Yeah. And so actually, if you're going away from the divine, that is, you're going towards your ego and towards the self. And
correct. Yes. Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something else that you said there is that, that the divine is within everything, and everything is within the divine. And I think what that does is that informs morality. And something you said that I found really interesting when we met was that equality is a theological idea, not just an ethical idea. Explain what you mean by that.
Yes, that's a very good question. And this is really because of this concept of oneness. And this idea just kind of reverses our thinking about the divine. So essentially, if we say we are part of the divine, we live inside the divine, although we can't see this. So if we say that's the premise that we start with, so let's follow the logic. So if everything is the divine, then how can any part of the divine be more or less important, more or less equal than any other part? And therefore, inside the divine, everything's equal. It simply just has a different form, or no form at all, actually. So therefore, the hierarchy is not just unkind of what we talk about, unequal things. It is metaphysically false, but an act of home, or what we call the sense of I. So when you go to Gurdwara, you can see how this theology sort of expresses itself. So, for example, everybody sits on the floor. And when you go to the prayer hall, everyone sits on the floor. When you go to the London hall, everyone sits on the same level. It does not matter if you're a king or a visitor or a pauper. You all sit at the same level. You eat the same langar. So you don't hear about generally don't hear about equality in the Gurdwara, but you might feel it in your knees when you're sitting down.
Yeah. Or trying to get up again.
Yes.
And actually, it's probably sort of helpful to point at this point that in the Gurdwara, there's no elder, there's no leader, there's nobody that runs everything. That if you're looking at kind of worship, there are people that have roles within that worship, but there isn't a hierarchy in who's allowed to do what.
That's also very true as well. I mean, there isn't a hierarchy. I mean, although Gurdwaras do employ people who are versed in the code of conduct.
Yeah.
But actually, anyone can do the service. Anyone can read the Guru Granth Sahib. Anyone can sing. Anyone can take the Guru Granth Sahib upstairs, up to its room, and anyone can partake in the volunteer in the seva or in the cooking of food, langar, washing the dishes, cleaning. So everyone is welcome to do it, and it's actually encouraged as well, actually.
And I think what this, I don't know, this is what happens with me as the RE teacher, as I see that kind of connection between Hindu Dharma, where the divine spark is in all and they bow to the divine in others, and then therefore they practice a sort of ahimsa and practice of non-violence. And look at, God created people in his own image, and that makes them, there's this element of similar truths within all the different religions, but I think probably how it plays out is slightly different. And I think within Sikhi, I think they really embody that sense of equality because it's so clearly linked to their theological beliefs, and they make sure that it plays out in the real, in the sort of observable world. It's not just an idea, it actually is a way that you live your life. I think it's so lovely. I want to talk about the concept of Gurmukh. If you could just explain what it is, how Sikh would understand that and how they would live it out in their life.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, a Gurmukh is what we would call someone who's guru facing, who has a guru facing mind, versus the other side is what we call a Manmukh, with a self facing mind. Again, this goes back to the idea of, so all your actions take you towards the divine or take you away from the divine towards yourself. But a Gurmukh is guru facing, taking on the wisdom of the guru and walking towards the divine. So that's what a Gurmukh essentially looks like. Now, we talk about pillars, 3 pillars actually, which I actually do find a little bit lazy and frame a little bit around Abrahamic concepts. But I would say, how does a Gurmukh do this? And I would say they develop what I would call virtuous habits instead. And I use that term because I find that a far simpler and more practical and understandable term, especially for the ordinary person, which after all, who religion and faith should be for. So I would say, therefore, there might maybe about 6 or 7 high-level virtuous habits. Those habits that if we can do consistently will take us towards the divine. And some of them you will know because you will teach 3 of them at least in class. The first one is Nam Japana, which we know about, Kirtana, and one Gishakana. Then I would probably add towards that seva, which is serving others. And then I'll also add what we call Kristi Jivan, living a householder's life. Because it's through that kind of life that you get a chance to practice all the other elements. Then I would also say standing up for equal rights for all, because that links back to the idea of equality, but it's also the Kshatriya dimension of a Gurmukh. So a sage soldier is obliged to stand up for the truth, the right thing. And then from the very last and probably the most under talked about, it's what we call development vivek buddhi. This is the ability to discern intelligently. And when you discern intelligently, you're using that to discern which actions will take you towards the divine and which are going to take you away from the divine. So that on itself is a huge topic. Also, when we talk about Vivek Buddhi, it is also often likened to the sharp edge of a weapon. It is the mind that cuts through the darkness and the mistruths of this age to plot a path to walk towards the divine. And this goes back to the earlier question you asked about, and I talked about Gyan Kavik, about being the weapon. So as a result of this debate with the development of this, over all those kind of virtuous habits, you have the development and growth of what we call the avastha, which is a state of mind that develops after doing those things consistently. Now that could be doing things consistently that take you towards the divine or away from it. And therefore virtuous habits are designed to take your avastha or state of mind towards the divine. So that's the kind of way, so if you're a Gurmukh a Gurmukh is someone who would understand that and be looking to follow that path and understand that their target is to walk towards the divine. But in order to do that, they have to change their mindset, and the mindset comes to the development and growth of avastha through virtuous habits.
It's really fascinating. I'm just kind of thinking about this, the symbol of the sword, because I think there is, at its heart, there is a kind of almost a, what's the word I'm looking for? A literal meaning of a sword, that actually everyone is equal and should be fighting together, and that sense of equality. There's the other about the sort of more kind of ethical moment of like standing up against injustice and standing up for equality. But also there's almost this sort of intellectual or spiritual kind of symbolism of it as well, that you've just kind of talked about, didn't you? You sort of talked about the sort of sharp edge and keeping your mind sharp and cutting sort of through and between that sort of being Gurmukh, being, divine facing, or sort of moving away from the divine. So I think it's really important that when we're teaching Sikhi, that we understand the layers and the nuances and, you know, the depth of that symbolism, and don't kind of essentialize it or simplify it to one or two things.
You're absolutely right. And I'd go a little bit further and say, actually, you know, where there are circumstances of oppression and other things, you know, the sword has been used. It has been used in the past to fight back the Mughals, for example. It's not just symbolic. If you are a person of truth, if you're a saint, then there is an obligation to fight for that truth as
Yeah.
well,
Yes.
and allow other people to have the freedom to be able to worship in the way they want to. So
Yes.
there is that element as well, but it
Yeah.
starts internally with doing all
Yeah.
this work first of all that Gulmak will do before it gets to that stage.
Yes. I think that's what I was clumsily trying to say when I was saying it's a literal meaning of, you know,
Yes.
it's used to fight, but I didn't, you expressed it much better than I. And I think that's what we sometimes do find with Sikhi. I think sometimes we focus too much on the literal ritual or behavior or symbol rather than the meaning of those things to Sikh. So, are there any specific kind of Sikh rituals that maybe we don't teach authentically?
I think there's this conception that Sikhi is anti-ritual. You know, it does not like rituals or practice that are just rituals. I'd actually say that's a little bit misleading, and I would say the position is that, you know, Sikhi would reject anything, a ritual that's mechanical, that's followed blindly. So without doing a piece of work, you know, doing some work or practice or a ritual, without the inner work going on, it's a meaningless act. So if you do not know why you're doing something, what is that? How can you discern whether that's going to take you towards the divine or not? Can you discern what outcome that would produce? So, for example, what is the reason for getting up early in the morning and doing your daily prayers? It is to develop a mindset and a discipline to think about the divine on a regular basis and a consistent basis. So that what you do. Once you stop, once you forget that and you just read the prayers at speed and just to get through them so you can go to work, then you fall into this blind ritual practice. So it's something that Sikhi would say, now this is a ritual, no longer relevant. And there's a story about Guru Nanak when he went to pray with the Qazi. Qazi was asked by a Qazi to come and pray with him. And the Guru Nanak just sat down while the Qazi they started their prayers and read the namaz and got through that. Guru Nanak did not move. And at the end of the prayers, the Guru Nanak was asked, why did you not pray with us? Guru Nanak said, I would pray if you were praying as well. And the Qazi said, well, I was praying. Could you not see me? Guru Nanak said, well, you weren't, because you were thinking about your horse back at home while you were doing that. So therefore, how is it thinking about the divine? And so there are examples like that within that we would take to supplement what's within the Guru Granth Sahib. So that's, you know, when you talk about blind rituals or an act which has no focus towards it, and then it becomes a mechanical or a blind ritual, which is what Sikh is actually against.
There's almost elements of sort of, you know, mindfulness, isn't there, and sort of right concentration, that discipline of focusing the mind on something greater than yourself, and whether that's Buddha nature or, you know, or if it's Sikhi, if that's on the divine. Mm-hmm. So there's something that you mentioned earlier that I did want to just pick up on, which is about the 4 ages.
Yes.
Just explain what you meant by that and what that is.
So this is actually this is a common sort of concept within the Dharmic tradition. That there are, and the Guru Granth Sahib and the other Dharmic scriptures talk about these 4 ages, and this is just kind of generally recognized there. So the 4 ages, I'll name them: Satyug, which is the age of truth; Treta is the next age; Dwapara and Kaljug. And so if you imagine a table, and a table sitting there, Satyug is a table which has 4 legs. It's the age of truth. Treta, the next age, is where one leg is in pulled away, so it's still truthful, but it's shaky. In the 3rd age, 2 legs are gone, so it's not stable at all. It's starting to fall over. And in the dark age, the Kaljug age, there's only 1 leg. And what the Guru Granth Sahib tells us is that we are now in the dark age, and these ages have been circulating thousands and thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, or hundreds of thousands of years, in our sort of understanding. They follow one after the other, and then at the end of Kaljug, it goes back to the age of truth and starts again. So, why is that important, and why do we talk about that? You know, there's no way to prove it, I guess. But what is important is that throughout those 3 ages, what we call bhakti or method of devotional worship has existed in every age. The way we talk about Gurmukh, or the way we talk about the divine, has existed in every age. So it shows us that this methodology or this way of thinking about the divine has always been there. And so that's the kind of way we look at it. And that's essentially what we try to, when we talk about the 4 ages, we look at the 4 ages and look at it from that perspective.
And they're cyclical. So,
Yes.
None of those last forever. So it'll move from one to the other to the other.
Correct, yes.
And I think that's it's the kind of Dharmic tradition and their sort of cyclical understanding of time and experience, I think, is so helpful for our mental health, because I think if you see time as a line, then actually it feels that there's very little flexibility, that you're almost kind of stuck. If you see life cyclically, you know that nothing lasts forever and we're in this stage and it's going to come out. We'll probably go back in it again. And there's just that sense maybe of predictability that I think makes us feel a bit safe. And I think a lot of us living in the world today, even if we're not Sikh, I think we kind of feel that this is an age of ignorance where we've lost touch with the divine, we've lost touch with truth, we've lost trust, touch with, examining and walking towards the light, I guess.
Yes, and I'd probably add a little bit more to that. I mean, knowing that or understanding that or using that as a framework in your mind, it kind of gives you a sense of hope for the future and a sense of direction and a sense of confidence as well, which you may not have otherwise.
Yes. And you mentioned the word bhakti there. Could you just explain what that is?
So bhakti is a word that's used quite often, bhakti or bhakti, with a spelled with either a K or a G, depending which tradition you come from. Again, that's a very dumb concept. Bhakti essentially is a methodology that the Guru Granth Sahib talks about. And essentially, in loose terms, it means devotional worship is again, it's a very loose translation, but essentially the purpose of bhakti is to change your mindset completely, and is using all of those things I spoke about earlier, the virtuous habits, using those to get to a point where your mind is more consistently doing things that take you towards the divine. That's what bhakti means. In many Indian traditions, it's been reduced down just to meditation or using rosary beads and things like that. But from the Guru Granth Sahib perspective, or my perspective, it's much, much broader than that. It's everything that you do. So my career, for example, is part of my bhakti, my devotional worship. But when I go play football, that's part of it. Go to sleep, that's part of it. Nothing is out of it. Now, the important point about the bhakti is that it always has existed. So it's a common theme across the 4 ages I talk about. It's also why a scripture can span 1,000 years and include people from all walks of life. And so the standard framing that we get in a textbooks is, the 15th century bhakti movement, and that unfortunately misses the greater context which I'm talking about. Bhakti is something that's universal. It might show itself through someone who's spiritual, or someone who's one with nature, or it could show through someone who's a Christian, or Muslim, or Hindu, or Buddhist, or of another faith, or of no faith, actually. And to Guru Nanak, this is the true essence of each human being, and to follow a pre-trodden path, which are the different faiths, or to create their own path towards the divine. This is the same truth that exists in all faiths. It just looks different to the untrained, undiscerning eye. And
so is that really behind when Guru Nanak said, there is no Muslim, there is no Hindu, whose path should I follow? I should follow the path of the divine.
Yes.
Is that's exactly linked to that, isn't it?
That's exactly linked to that. To that story. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. One thing that we are really interested in RE is kind of lived experiences, but more than that, I think we're really looking at data, and we're looking at social sciences data to help us understand the place of this faith within the world, within Britain. And so I just want to talk a little bit about Sikhs in Britain. So it's probably about 500,000, isn't there, at last count, or just over 500,000. Who was the first Sikh in Britain, and when did they come?
That would probably be Maharaja Mandip Singh, the youngest son of the last Maharaja of Punjab, Mandip Singh. And he was 11 years old when the Sikh kingdom fell. And when the Maharaja passed away, there was a huge infighting going on, and there was no succession plan, and infighting occurred, and that allowed the British to take over the kingdom and annex it. Maharaja Mandip Singh was 11 years old, came to Britain in 1854. He was a favourite of Queen Victoria,
Yes.
who became his godmother. He grew up as a Christian and then later went back towards the city as well. So I would say that was the first Briton that probably came to England. But since then, we've had waves of people, Sikhs who've come to the UK. So it started with the soldiers because during the World Wars, many of the soldiers in the British Indian Army were Sikhs, and they would be found in different parts of the world. And also after the Punjab fell, a lot of them actually did join the British Army, and were posted in different parts of the world, including the UK. Then you had the post-partition migration. 1940s, late 40s, late 40s, early 40s, and that brought about a wave of peddlers. At that time, people would pack the suitcase, come here, sell their wares, and go back and come back again. And that was followed by East African migration from Uganda and Kenya in the sort of late 60s, early 70s, and that's kind of where kind of how we got up in the partition of how sort of the Sikh population has grown in the UK. The Gurdwara I'm at, the Khalsa Jatha, is the oldest was the anchor in about in 1908. It was the only Indian place of worship for about 40 odd years. And people came to that whether you were Hindu, Sikh, Muslim. If you were from India, that's being referred to. So there's a huge amount of richness within British history and the Sikhs.
And I think maybe the Sikh experience through that partition period of history, I think probably isn't necessarily distinctly taught. And I think, again, it's one of those kind of, we sort of simplify things and we leave bits out, but actually that's quite a significant part of why there are Sikhs in Britain today, because of that displacement, I guess. You mentioned there, because I think this is really fascinating and something I didn't know. So a lot of Sikhs fought for the British Army, but if you have a look at the percentage of the British Army that were Sikhs, but then percentage of them that lost their life and the percentage of them that got honoriated, there's quite some interesting statistics around that.
There are, and this is something that's quite undertaught, I would say. During the World War, Britain recruited the British Indian Volunteer Army, which went on to become the largest single unit in the World Wars. I think that's up to 1.8 million men, I think, at the height of it. And without this army, the war might not have been won. Sikhs made up some 20 to 30%. Most of them were soldiers from the Sikh Empire. Sikhs make up less than 2% of the Indian population, but they made up 20 to 30% of this armed force. From that, there are numerous stories of what Sikhs did. About 80,000 Sikhs died, frontline deaths. So if you take all the frontline deaths in the two world wars, Sikhs make up nearly 23% of those deaths. Sikhs were wounded, at 14 Victoria Crosses, which is the highest for any community per capita, I guess. And if you go to the memorial gates near Buckingham Palace, and also I think near the Royal Albert Hall, you'll see the names of them all inscribed within in that monument there as you come into it. There's I guess another big thing that people are not that aware of the Battle of Saragai in 1897, when 21 Sikh soldiers held up about 10,000 tribesmen fighting to last men in order to preserve that field. Now, this is taught at Sandhurst, but it's really studied at schools anywhere else. For teachers who want to teach us, you could teach all of this within one lesson very, very easily.
And I think it's so important, I think, particularly now with all the sort of identity politics and misinformation and, just hatred, I think, to really equip our young people to have really powerful knowledge about reality. And this is not about proving people wrong or changing people's mind. It's just presenting facts, accurate facts, and then the children can make up their own mind. I think it is so important. And I think the other thing is I think sort of, Sophia Dalip Singh, who is the daughter of Dalip Singh or granddaughter.
She's the daughter of Dalip Singh, who's the youngster who was brought from India after Sikh Jatha.
I think it's more common to look at people like that. She was a suffragette back in the 20s. But is there other sort of notable Sikhs that maybe from British history that could be really fascinating to explore in lessons?
Absolutely. There's a Sikh whose name was Hardeep Singh Malik. He's the first Indian fighter pilot flying in the Royal Flying Corps, as they were known at that time during World War One. So he's the first turban Sikh in a British uniform, and he, later went on to become a diplomat. Coincidentally, he was also a past president of the Gurdwara IMAT as well. So he was there as well. Another name which very few people will know about is Narinder Singh Kapani. He is known as the father of fibre optics. He did his doctoral research at Imperial College in London and went on towards Harvard to develop it. So literally, when you're doing a search, you do Google search on him, you're using the infrastructure that he developed to find out about him. Another sort of person I would say is Sophia's sister, Catherine Mandip Singh. She was a guarantor of Jewish families who fled Nazi persecution in the 1930s. So she brought families here, giving them guarantees and make sure they were safe, and brought it back to the UK. So there's a lot of history that's been built up there.
I think it's interesting you say the word history, because I just think actually what a lovely cross-curricular project to do. Like if they're doing Second World War in history, if you could then tap into that and create some resources where you're, supporting the history curriculum as well as kind of giving that real layered, kind of really powerful knowledge that links to your Sikhi curriculum as well. I think that could be really powerful for our young people. What sort of underpins, I guess, a lot of the stuff I'm doing at the moment regarding Sikhi on the podcast is a kind of reaction to events that have happened in society. And I think what has happened recently is the Sikh faith's been really misrepresented in the media. Sorry, what do you think we need to know as RE teachers to kind of correct these misconceptions?
I guess you're talking about the Southampton case and the murder of Henry Novak by a Sikh young man. And it's a tragic thing that happened. The Sikh man that was carrying two different blades of the kirpan, which he wore under his clothes, and another weapon called the beige gloves, and which he used for the murder. And he tried to use the exemptions under the law for religious purposes to get away with it, and the court did not agree with it. What happened was it was a terrible, terrible thing. I guess the thing that came out of it is that, first of all, the law didn't give him protection. It worked as it was intended to. So when an article of faith, it should never be used in a crime. When it does do that, it loses its protections. The kirpan sits in the same family as the Scottish dagger that they wear with, the kukri, and then maybe a number of other cultural dresses where knives and daggers are allowed. So it fits within that category. So it has an exemption under the law. So kirpan has that exception under the law. I suppose the other thing to note is that the person who did this, the Sikh who did this, could not be a person of faith. And all Sikhs unanimously backed the verdict and have been condemning the action of the young Sikh who did this. Really, this is a complete transgression of the saint warrior kind of principle that Sikhs hold dear to their heart. Sikhs mourned Henry's death as one of their own. So an Akhand Path was held in his memory at the Gurdwara Southall, and the Akal Takht, which is the highest Sikh authority, condemned the murder and backed the court's decision in an open statement that he should as well. Really, his act was a corruption of the faith's values and not really an expression of them. I suppose the learning from this is that it's individual responsibility. And this is what probably all communities as well, is that everyone has individual responsibility, and an individual action should not be used to punish a whole community. And that's kind of the message I guess we really need to think about, and how we promote that message, especially in this environment of social media that's promoting a different sort of narrative.
So I think there's almost three layers there, isn't there? There's number one, there was the misreporting by the media of not getting the language right and not getting the terminology right, because he did not use a kirpan to do this. The second thing is anybody claiming to be Sikh would not murder someone else because of, just very, very, very strong sense of equality and the sense of divine in another.
Yes.
But I think also just making that parallel that the actions of one person does not represent the whole, in the same way as, like, literally, I think a week later, somebody murdered somebody using a kitchen knife. But
Correct.
There isn't anybody going, well, then we need to get rid of all kitchen knives.
Absolutely.
There is that responsibility that, yes, you're allowed to have kitchen knives, you're just not allowed to kill people. It's the killing people that's wrong, not the having of a knife. And I think there's so much misrepresentation about that story and misleading, but also that no media outlet has done any kind of retraction to say, actually, this is how the Sikh community have responded. We misreported this and this was what was real. No one is promoting that nuance or that critical thinking or that intellectual pursuit of truth within the media. They're just trying to push a narrative. And, I think that's why RE is so important. And that is why connection with lived experiences of real people is important, that we don't get our knowledge from a news story, that we talk to the community, we talk to people.
I would completely agree with you. But I do have to also stand up for some of the media who did actually report on it, and they were actually very good and presented a nuanced, a very balanced position. So there are some papers. It's probably the broadsheets rather than the tabloids who did that, but there were some who were actually very genuine about how they looked at it and presented it, and we're very grateful for those journalists themselves.
Yeah. No, you're right. Sorry. I didn't mean to tarnish all media outlets with the same brush, but you're right to say that. Thank you. You mentioned at the beginning your work with Gurdwara Aid, and so we'll put a link to the show notes in that. There's also an incredible book. Do you just want to talk to us about the book that you've had produced?
Yes. So we produced what's known as the Gurdwara Handbook and published to Gurdwara Aid. This is an operational guide for Gurdwaras. And what it covers is, and it's the first of its kind, uh, and probably in not just the Sikh community, but other communities, I don't think anything like this exists at all. And what it does do is it talks about the legal framework for Gurdwaras, the roles and responsibilities of different charity structures, constitution structures. It talks about the financial systems, the IT systems, safeguarding, food safety systems, every aspect of running a Gurdwara from an operational perspective is covered in the handbook. It's something that took us nearly 2 years to write, and we've had to go through a number of iterations and also have it reviewed by various individuals and authorities and charity lawyers and some departments as well to make sure it stands on its own 2 feet. So we're hugely proud of it, and it's been taken up really well, and lots of Gurdwaras and Sikh organisations are using it. And also, have to say, some non-Sikh organisations and places of worship are also using this as well. So it's a really nice
As a
way
blueprint of how they can then.
Absolutely.
My goodness, that's gorgeous. I love that. And it is a beautiful book, beautiful hardback book, incredible sort of illustrations and pictures and things like that. So it is very beautiful. The other thing is your Substack, which is quite a new little project, isn't it? Is it called The Churning? Is that what it's called?
It's called The Churning.
Yeah.
And I thought, I always wanted to do something like this. And really, why did I start doing it? I just woke up one morning because I have the group copy the group grants up at home, and we take, when we Prakash or open the group grants up in the morning, we take a line in the morning, and one of the lines just stuck out to me, and I just read it, and I thought, okay, I've got to do something with this. It's making me think and making me go through a process. And I should not waste it and leave it inside me. I should share it. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to explore light in the group grants up in a bit more detail, but also to show someone else, to demonstrate to them what the path of bhakti looks like. So I would liken it like the path is like flowing water. It's a stream that flows around rocks, carries sediments, small stones, does lots of different things, but always manages to float around until it finds a river. That river will eventually flow into the ocean. And I want other seekers from any faith traditions or none to see what that path might look like from another seeker. And that's really what I was trying to do with this. I don't know where it'll go, but I will continue to do it in that sort of lines.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And just as we close, I ask all my guests this. If you could wake up tomorrow and one thing was different about the world, what would you want it to be?
That's something I had to think about. And after I thought about it, I thought, actually, this is quite easy from my tradition. So if I woke up tomorrow, I would like to see a government that's made up of a society of saints, a group of people from different backgrounds who followed the path of bhakti in their tradition and who use that to run the country. I'm going to pause and let that sink in.
Yes. Imagine what that could be like. Thank you. That's a lovely answer. Thank you for taking the time to think about it. Mandip, thank you so much. If to anyone who's listening that hasn't been to Khalsa Jatha British Isles in Holland Park, it is the most beautiful Gurdwara. It's so welcoming. their kind of educational branch is fabulous. So I've been there when there's been primary school students there, and I've taken teachers and leaders there as well. And everyone comes away just exhilarated. And, my lovely teachers that I took there are still talking about it. So I really do recommend that. It's in a beautiful place of London as well. So, and Manjeet, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolute pleasure. And I really enjoyed talking about some of the things which are quite personal to me, and I don't normally talk about these things. So thank you very much for letting me have the opportunity to talk and share.
Oh, this is what this is for. This is just listening to things that we can't read in books. This is really wonderful and a real privilege. So thank you. My name is Louisa Jane Smith, and this has been the RE podcast, the podcast for those of you who think RE is boring, but it's not. It helps keeps our minds sharp and enlightened, focusing on a path to take us closer to the divine. But thank you so much for letting us bore the life out of you.